Welcome back, everybody, to The Connection. It's a podcast here of government market news. That's govmarketnews.com. Visit us on the web. I'm Marshall Macomber with Think P3 here in Washington, D.C., your co-host here at The Connection. And joining me, as always, is my colleague, Mary Scott Nabers in Austin.
Good morning,
Hi,
Marshall.
Mary, we've got the coolest job. We get to talk to the coolest people and the most relevant people all the time. Today, folks, we're going to talk about ports. Everybody saw what happened in Baltimore with the collapse of the Key Bridge and how it affected the Port of Baltimore. We've got with us today Chris Ward. Chris, we're the former executive director of the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey. Chris, welcome. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you. Great to see you. Great to see you, Mary, Marshall. Delighted to be here.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Well, look, let's get right into this thing. You know, you've been there. You've been in the seat at probably the nation's, if not busiest, second busiest port. You know the pressures. You know just the day-to-day of operating a port. But obviously, you saw what happened in Baltimore.
Yeah.
Give us your thoughts with the bridge, with the port, with the ship. What are your thoughts about what happened there?
Well, first off, what a tragedy. The loss of lives, the men who were working on that bridge is a terrible, terrible tragedy. And also for the Port of Baltimore, Jim White really did a remarkable job repositioning that port, bringing cargo in, growing that port. A lot of people felt that it had some limitations due to the distance from the Atlantic. And to see that collapse and to see that tragedy and the destruction of the bridge was really crushing, just because so much economic activity was developed off that port. But for me, the main thing about that accident is that the lessons learned is not that this is a systemic problem, that there's a bridge, safety, cargo ship problem. Accidents happen. They happen for particular reasons, and this one happened for a particular reason. The one thing that I would hate for the Port of Baltimore to face or other ports is a series of regulations that add more cost, more complexity, more technology to the ports when they're facing financial difficulties as it is. We need to recognize this was an electrical failure. It was a failure of command leadership on the boat, and the NTSB will find out all of the particulars, but I don't think the nation needs to think that we have a structural problem, that our bridges are poorly designed or poorly managed. Rather, this was a terrible one-off tragedy that I think we can learn from, but I would hate to see government rush in with tons of regulations and additional costs.
Chris, you know, we have a lot of private sector companies that watch these podcasts, and they love hearing from an expert like you. Will there be work there? If so, how does a company get involved? And if that's already all covered now, since it's been a while, talk to us a little bit about what private sector contracting firms need to know about ports.
Sure.
How do they build relationships? How do they get involved? Because as you and I have discussed already, we know that there's so much money in the federal programs now for ports because they are our economic vitality machines.
Exactly.
So talk to us about ports.
Sure. So the paradigm of ports right now is going through an incredible economic transition. Traditionally, port authorities, New York and New Jersey in particular, were created to be standalone, economically independent agencies. The Port Authority uses its tunnel and bridge toll system to effectively be a self-funded agency. That economic era is coming to an end. The challenge for ports now is to work with the federal government, work with local contractors and business development teams to marry a supply chain funding infrastructure agenda that allows port authorities to connect with the federal government programs and use the local expertise with the local contractors and the local businesses to marry the funding with the project and deliver the project for the authorities on time and under budget. So the authorities are not using their own money, but rather local contractors and companies are working with the Port Authority to facilitate the incredible infrastructure agenda that Joe Biden has put together and deliver those projects into the port authorities, because the days of self-funding authorities and them being financially independent, unfortunately, are coming to an end.
What changed? I'm picking up from the comments there. Is it container ship size? Is it volume of trade? What changed?
What changes when you think about the Port Authority and the toll structure that really underpinned the Port Authority reached its breaking point. Right now, you're paying $15 to cross the George Washington Bridge. You can't take that toll up to $25, even though the Port Authority needs the revenue to build the ports, to build the airports. So you've reached a mismatch of how the funding that was created originally for authorities, the economies have overcome them. They've been swept away by huge economic changes, whether it's the cars, whether it's rail, whether it's airplanes. All of that has changed the economic underpinnings of authorities, and they need to recreate their financial model. And I think that's the opportunities for small, not small, but strategically placed businesses to provide expertise to deliver on projects that otherwise the Port Authority wouldn't be able
So,
to
Chris,
do.
it seems to me like, and gee, I'm no expert, so I could be wrong, but it seems to me like almost every port is trying to find ways to move product faster to rail lines, to trucks, to get it into the supply system. And so they have a need
Exactly.
for that kind of effort. Then it seems also like they need more storage space. But is that correct? Or what would you say are their greatest needs right now?
Well, I'll say it. We're entering into the Amazon economy, and the supply chain logistics and how ports function and how airports function are all now no longer standalone operations. They're part of an integrated supply chain logistics, and we have to get better at supply chain logistics. But we don't need to think about ports as a standalone operation. They need to now be fully integrated into the private sector, which is building transload facilities, building cross docks, building warehouses. You see it all across the country. So ports are not standalone independent investors anymore. They need to be connected into the industries which they feed and feed off them and grow off them. So a lot of port authorities are coming out of their sort of parochial perspective. We tend to our own knitting and are now have to have a much more expansive view of who their partners are going to be.
So the needs are growing. It's pretty clear, and they need private sector expertise. But let's take a step back. I'm a contractor. I've got a service. I want to offer a port up and down the West Coast, East Coast. I have to pick a port, first of all. Maybe it's I want to help them electrify or whatever it might be, something with logistics, whatever that
Mhm.
service might be. Tell us, how do ports operate? Who do I
Yeah,
talk to
yeah,
build that
before you answer,
relationship?
Chris, I want to
Mary,
jump in because that's
Sure.
Marshall's asking a question that I was going to also pose to you. So you have port commissioners and you
Yep.
have an executive director, and you probably have a facilities person and a procurement person. Who who do you try to get in to see?
Well, that is a really good question, Marion Marshall, because every contractor will tell you, no matter how much the agency thinks they're doing a good job outreaching, a contractor will tell you the world's opaque. I don't know how I get in there. I don't know how I end up finding where work might be, because you can have a website that has every contract that's coming. You can have a website that says this is where the capital plan is. And you can have a website that says this is the 5-year strategic plan. But until you understand the nexus of where you are within the market and what your value proposition is to the agency and where you are, in fact, providing innovation, is where you find your port of entry. And it's not always going to be the procurement person, because they're in the traditional bid role where obviously, ethics, talking inside the process, outside of the process makes it more complicated. I would urge everybody to think of what their key market transformation idea is, and then find a way to connect into the line agencies that are in fact administering, building, letting that contract, and not get caught up only within the bidding process, but really the value proposition. Right now, the port authorities are hungry for value propositions that can alleviate both funding as well as delivering faster, better, smarter. And that is my recommendation, or almost my mantra, for doing business with port authorities. Find that niche of where you can be a partner with a transformative idea that will inure to the bottom line of the authority. And it's not always the procurement person.
Can you flush that out? Value
Sure.
proposition.
Sure. Perfect example.
Give me an
Sure.
example of a value proposition. What does that mean?
Okay. Sea level rise for the port.
Yes.
Sea level rise is going to deeply threaten, basically ports that operate at sea level, with the seas rising 2 to 3 feet over the next 25 years. What kind of businesses are going to need to be brought into running terminals facing that environmental challenge? So if you have heavy construction contractors, you're going to be looking at elevating wharfs and docks. If you're an innovative technology company and you're doing routing through systems, you're getting cargo off the dock sooner, you're getting it into the supply chain, you're getting it through the ILA check at the gate. That kind of innovation, which moves things, reduces risks, protect assets. The Port Authority forecasts that they're probably going to have to spend anywhere from $20 to $25 billion weatherproofing the port facilities, and they're going to need the new ideas which are keeping pace with this incredible climate challenge that we have. And they're not doing they never do the kind of innovative technological research or construction strategies. They're going to be looking for companies to come in and go, here's how you can now run that port in this much more challenged environment, still make your money, but be more streamlined, avert risks, and take out the kind of huge infrastructure challenges that the seas rise could face.
So Chris, how great is the need for renewable energy power? Is that a big thing right now?
I would say the energy transition and the challenge of the energy transition is more than huge right now. For example, if you followed the wind power bidding process in New York, it's a tough lesson learned. We might have missed a major part of the market. We did not deliver as fast and as timely as we would want for the bids that are coming. I mean, think about this, Mary. The United States is forecasting that we're going to need 26,000 megawatts of offshore wind power to meet our net zero goals. It costs $700 million to put 600 megawatts of power off the coast of New York. This is a whole new business and a whole new industry that, if done well, will be the same as steam in the Industrial Revolution. But the challenge is we've yet to keep pace with building and delivering with the environmental goals that we know we desperately need. So there's a mismatch between achieving the wind power goals that we need offshore and onshore, as well as solar onshore. And we're falling behind that energy transition. So again, going back to my mantra here about faster, better, smarter, from procurement, from delivery to construction to on-time delivery, all of that is going to have to be a part of the energy transition. Or like this wind power, where we're missing contracts and inflation is taking the value of those contracts out from underneath the developers. We need to be better, faster, smarter if we're going to make this energy transition.
Chris, on that point of energy, Inflation Reduction Act, right, had
Yes.
all billions and billions of dollars for ports. I'm looking at EPA's $3 billion Clean Ports program right now to help with that transition. I mean, that's extraordinary amounts of money out there. Is that
extraordinary, Marshall? Just think about the amount of money that the four major spending bills that this administration has been able to get. It's such an opportunity, and that's why I'm talking about faster, better, smarter.
And is that money, Chris, help us understand that type of money? Are those
Sure.
private sector firms that can apply for that money in partnership with the port, or is it all just going for capital expenditure at the port itself? What are your thoughts?
Well, the bulk and lion's share of it, of course, is going to come through the large agencies. And the key thing, though, is the large agencies need expertise to figure out how they, in applying for the large amounts of money, can actually deliver the project on the ground. And there's a mismatch between accepting federal dollars and then delivering them and building the projects on the ground. But so it starts with those really big projects. But nonetheless, there are so many niche funding opportunities for environmental cleanup, just like you were saying, in terms of wetlands restoration, in terms of waterway cleanups, in terms of all sorts of environmental regular environmental barriers to port improvement. And they can be very small. They can be, technology for mobility. They can be wetlands restoration. They can be large scale dredge material handling strategies. So creativity is really going to drive how well people unlock this federal money for the large agencies.
Mm-hmm.
Chris, I want to skip over to a little bit different conversation with you because you have been in the New York area for so long and you have held so many positions inside government there.
Right.
So I would love to get you just to give us an overview of some of the things you see happening there that will be collaborative initiatives so that the public and the private sector can come together to deliver whatever it is. Can you just talk a little bit about what you see in that part of the United States?
Well, I'm always an optimist, Mary. And I look at the amount of money and the focus now, finally, that this country has put on infrastructure and this administration's delivery of the infrastructure bills, because New York faces a tipping point. And I'm not even talking about the homeless crisis and the immigrant crisis, which is so stressing the budgets, but cities are going through a major transformation now. And one of them I've mentioned already, which is climate change.
Mm-hmm.
Climate change is coming, and so people think it's sea level rise, but it's not just sea level rise. It's heat, it's extreme temperature. So New York needs to weatherize itself in a major, major way. And I mentioned the sea level rise question. Every major city on the water on Pacific or Atlantic is going to face this as a major, major challenge. And no budget, no municipal budget has ever been in place to do it. So now we're talking about a whole new funding requirement. On top of that, you have the whole question of urban mobility. Again, with the Amazon economy, cities are just getting choked and choked with congestion. New York City, the estimate is we spend about $60 billion on congestion alone. Somebody has to figure out how to crack that problem. So innovation on delivery, trucks, rail, small scale delivery is going to have to be realized, because think about it, Mary, it's a major, major depressor on economic growth. That congestion, every dollar in congestion is a dollar that's not going into the economy. So New York's looking to pass its congestion pricing model, which is one step, but it's not the only step. We're going to have to deal with interborough truck trips. That Amazon economy has to take place. The other thing that's occurring is you're seeing in urban areas the conflagration of transformation, where we need affordable housing and we see neighborhoods growing and changing, and marrying affordable housing with economic growth and housing development is another major challenge for New York. Finding worker space for people who are in the economy that are not at the top end of the economy is a major, major challenge. But finally, if you look at New York City has to build 2 new tunnels into the city from New Jersey, repair 2 new tunnels, build a whole new bus terminal right in downtown Manhattan, has to expand the Hudson Yards project in Manhattan, has to spend $16 billion to expand Kennedy Airport for its 4 major terminals there, has to spend probably $4 to $5 billion at Newark Airport, and then modernize the port. So these major cities on the oceans that are major economic development drivers are going to be going through a huge transformation on how they deliver, how they operate in terms of mobility and their connectivity to the rest of the economy and to the rest of the world.
We're coming up here about towards the end of our time here with Chris. But Chris, let me add just maybe one more question, and then Mary, you get one more in there as well. Chris, ports. This is probably a dumb question. Is do ports compete against each other for traffic?
Yes. It's it's sort of
Therefore, it's a dumb question, which is why I asked it. Of course they compete, right? Of course. So if
yeah.
I am a private company looking to determine which ports with which to engage, what am I looking for at that port? Is it leadership? Is it I grew up in Georgia, and when I was a kid, I saw the port of Savannah and Department of Transportation build the new bridge across the river there. This beautiful
Yep.
cable stayed bridge. They're going to tear it down. It's 30 years old. It's at least a 100-year bridge. They're going to tear it down because the ships cannot fit under the bridge. Is that a port I'm looking to engage with? Or is New York? Or is it California? Is it Houston? What am I looking for?
Well, first of all, I think you're looking at all of them. I mean, take your example of Savannah. Savannah was a sleepy little port. You know, had its traffic, but it's growing dramatically right now. And that's what I meant by the connectivity worldwide. And I'm not just talking about China, but all of these ports are, and in fact, feeders for economic growth for the country. So they are all geographically located, and they're all servicing, an economy that is vital to that particular area. So what I would mostly be focusing on is um, what's the economy that is getting served by the port? What are its challenges where it can't deliver? Where is the economy going that it hadn't been before that the port's going to have to service? And really drill down on that connectivity for your business. So, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey is gigantic. Where, Savannah is a much more smaller port. But each one of them will have that same niche problem for what your business is and where you can get into that market. So each one of them are dynamic, have their own problems and challenges, but I wouldn't think that you're going to go around and select a port because the way a port operates. I would really think about what your value proposition is within the economy of where the port's operating and marry that opportunity to the port rather than the other way around.
Okay, Marshall, I've got one last question for Chris. And Chris, I ask this because I know you did oversee the airport and you know a lot about airports. And recently I wrote a column about all of the money that is available for projects at airports. And while I was doing that research, I also found out, much to my dismay, that of the largest and busiest airports in the world, 8 of them are located in China. And then I realized that America has none in that top 10. So now we have the infrastructure funding. It is available through 2026 at least. What are our airports going to do? How are they going to use that money? What do you see happening? Just put your futuristic hat on a little bit.
Well, first of all, let's recognize that all port authorities that are running airports now recognize that the airport is no longer the kind of economic development generator that it was before. Airports are becoming deeply integrated into the local economy. They can be part of the healthcare industry. They can be part of the freight industry. So airports are also going through a transformative evolution in terms of what their business is. It's no longer just, leisure passengers flying. Now they are connected into something much, much larger and much more dynamic. And what they are seeking to do and using the federal funding is to connect their facility to a worldwide network with all of the alliances and all of the, the airlines looking to get into new markets. Authorities need to build for the growth that's coming to their area. So for example, MacArthur Airport out on Long Island, again, it's been a small, fairly sleepy airport. Eastern Long Island is going through a major population expansion of a very particular population expansion of, well-educated tech people who want to be near New York, who need housing which is affordable. So a transit-oriented development on the Long Island Railroad next to MacArthur Airport and putting the necessary money into MacArthur Airport to capture maybe 3 to 4 million passengers would be a huge economic opportunity for the New York region to diversify where people and how people are flying in and around the regions. It's that kind of targeted focus of what you need to do to bring economic activity through the transformation of the aviation industry, which really is the secret sauce, if you will, for airport development.
That is kind of, we could talk all day, Marshall,
All
but I
day.
know we're out of time. And Chris, you've been a wonderful guest. Thank you
Thank you.
so much for giving us
Cheers.
so much to think about.
Great. Good to see you.
Chris, hope to have you on again. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. See us at Government Market News to watch the podcast. Thanks, Chris.